This is a song for my friends Jaret and Gary. They started a podcast and said a theme was necessary. They're just a couple of guys in a band that you know. Some Rockstar Dads who started a show. So here's the next episode.
Welcome back to the Rockstar Dad Show. I told you that we had a good guest today, and this one, and there's build-up here, Gary, because we've been supposed to have Dave on for quite some time.
Not just that, been looking forward to it.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Well, that's what I just said, Gary. I'm sorry if I didn't word it.
Well, I mean, like, we're supposed to have him on means like, God, this is
no, I know. I'm kidding. It is Dave Schrader, everybody, from the Paranormal 60. How are you, Dave? What's going on?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me on today.
Man, so you know, obviously we need to talk about dad stuff, but it's very difficult to do sometimes when you have guests come on and their own content from their show or their life or whatever is sometimes more interesting than being a dad, you know? I don't know.
Well, what's interesting is that my paranormal life and my dad life do bleed over. So I've got some weird stories I can tell you about being a dad and a paranormal investigator and having things come home with me from time to time that freak out the kids.
I got to be honest. That was going to be one of my first questions is how all of this, bleeds into family. But I think the first thing that we should do is just get like a little bit of background. And find out, you were on a long running show before just called Darkness Radio.
Right.
And this is pretty recent, which actually this works out good. It works out good that we put you off.
I agree.
Because now, you literally just launched the Paranormal 60 with Dave Schrader. And so, you know what? Maybe this is some paranormal shit. Maybe
it was meant to be.
It was meant to be.
That's right. That's what we all have to look at, right? You look at the silver lining and everything. And actually, you guys were dealing with sickness. We were dealing with sickness, changeovers, life happens. And that's what it's like being a dad, right?
It really is. I mean, so paranormal activity, things like that. Is that something that you were interested in as a kid? I mean, I got to be honest, the movie Poltergeist scared the living shit out of me.
Right.
When I was a kid.
I was actually, I've joked around about it, but I've said the paranormal has hunted me my whole life as opposed to me hunting it. Yeah. I had my first experiences when I was about 2.5, 3 years old. I have no memory of them, but my family talks about it. I would stay at my grandfather's house and my grandmother's ghost would come visit me and read to me and talk to me. And I would tell my mom and she's like, "Oh, honey, that's nice. You're dreaming. Remember grandma's in heaven." And I'm like, "Yeah, but she came down and she was talking to me and she misses us." And then I told them, finally, the one thing that kind of clicked for them was I explained. I said, "Yeah, it was funny. She didn't have all of her teeth. She was in this brown dress with white polka dots and a necklace." And again, my mom just kind of blew it off. And a couple weeks later was talking to my aunt. And she goes, "Dave keeps having these recurring dreams whenever he sleeps over at Dad's house. And this is what's going on." And she goes, and then this time he pointed out she didn't have her teeth. She was wearing this brown dress with white spots. And my grandmother was buried in a closed coffin. The only people that knew what she was buried in were my aunt, my grandfather, and the mortician. My mom didn't even know. And when my mom got done describing things, she goes, "Terry, that's exactly what they buried Mom in, and they had removed her false teeth for burial."
Right.
So very strange kind of deal. And then I grew up in a haunted house in Medina, Illinois, and just, have always kind of been in the right place at the wrong time, or the wrong place at the right time every time to have strange encounters. I saw what I believe to be a Bigfoot when I was about 12 in Foley, Alabama, UFOs in the sky in 2006 at Trout Lake, Washington at the Assetti Ranch. And then from there, it's just been little things sprinkled out throughout my entire life.
Do you think that there may be more people at a younger age that are like open to some kind of paranormal activity and there may be something, I don't know if it's a brain or just their awareness or whatever, that they're open to it at a younger age, and maybe they get shut down by adults so much, whatever, you're seeing things, or that's not real, it's your imagination, that they start to lose that as they get older?
Well, in the work that was done by Dr. Ian Stevens regarding reincarnation, he studied over 3,000 cases of children having these memories, past life memories, detailed accounts. And they would sometimes have scars or birthmarks. And then he would find out that the person that precluded him in life, that he's reincarnated from, was hit in the head with a hatchet and killed. And this kid is born with a purple scar on his or purple birthmark on his forehead in the same place the axe hit him. So there's a lot of these strange idiosyncrasies that take place in the paranormal, and kids have this ability to kind of know things about their past lives. But as you said, as you start to tamp that down and they start having new life experiences, the old life goes away, the new life experiences build on top of it. And I think that's where we lie. As parents, you guys might enjoy this. This was a very strange story. My friend Chris Fleming, who's a psychic medium and has been on a bunch of the different TV shows, was talking about this case that they were investigating. They were really worried because they had a newborn, and then they had this like 3-year-old son who was constantly trying to get in the crib with the newborn. Mm-hmm. And they said, the doctors told us, just let it happen. This kid is intrigued by the baby. He wants to be around the baby. So they let it happen. And they had one of those baby monitors watching. And they said they let him get in. He climbed in and laid down next to the baby. And he says to the baby, "Tell me about heaven. I'm starting to forget about it."
Wow. Yeah, that's
right.
Crazy.
So I think is in the youth, right? First of all, we know the eyes, scientifically, the eyes are different in children. Mm-hmm. So they may be seeing in different light spectrums, which allow them to see spirits. Mm-hmm. And as we get older and the cones and rods come together and we start seeing just what's there, we lose some of that visual perspective. So that could be a part of it. There's so much that goes on with the possibilities and probabilities to how we experience these things.
I want to be honest about something here.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a couple of things. First of all, I think you and I should hang out more. And here's why. Because everywhere I go, people just want to know about shit I'm doing all the time. Mm-hmm. Because I have a life that people are like, well, you met this person or you did this one. I think you're way more interesting than me. And so I would get a night off if we, so it's like people wouldn't give a shit what I'm doing if you're sitting there telling stories like that. That's number one. Secondly, mm-hmm. I think if I am reincarnated, first of all, I think I always died at a young age because there's no fucking way I was anywhere before air conditioning and was ever in a happy environment. There's no way I wouldn't have done it.
No, I'm with you on that. I feel the same. If there was no air conditioning or internet, I just don't believe that I existed before this incarnation.
100%. This is, but no, in all seriousness, I mean, so, interesting in your, in your, first thing that you were saying was, and something that I didn't really put into this, when I think paranormal, I guess I think, ghosts and mm-hmm. But you sort of put it into I guess, what does the word paranormal mean? Basically is what I'm asking.
It's like above normal. It's outside of the normal realm. So ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, monsters, myths, legends, all of this kind mm-hmm. of exists in one place.
Right. And that's the medium for your podcast is that radio it's a podcast and a radio show, or a podcast radio show.
When I began with Darkness Radio 16 years ago, we were on the radio.
Okay.
And then radio, there's really no money. So we moved over to the podcast side, and I did that for 8 years. And then just, as you mentioned, recently split from my partner just because I wanted to try something new mm-hmm. and reinvigorate myself for the show. So Tim is carrying on with Darkness Radio. I've taken on the new podcast, and awesome. So that's kind of where we're at, but it's just delving into all the different weird dark corners, right? And some people even put conspiracy underneath that cloak, because there are some weird aspects of different stories, and the governmental conspiracy regarding aliens and mm-hmm. and psychic phenomena and MK Ultra and all these bizarre things that you wouldn't normally think are part of the government's world.
Sure.
They've been working on it a lot longer than we give them credit for.
Well, it's interesting. The, that sort of stuff, I'm not really, that kind of stuff is, for me, like I believe in a lot of shit. I don't believe in a lot of shit, that kind of thing. I think I'm just probably more like an everyman in that regard. But
I think part of that's you have so much shit going on that whenever there's, hey, have you heard about this paranormal or this conspiracy or this whatever, you're just like, I don't have time for the details. Whatever.
That's accurate. That's an accurate description of things that I refuse to just let my head be filled with, because I am 90-0 and always have been. But as you say, like, some of these things like date back to, I mean, the paranormal activity has been happening since we started keeping records of time, right? I mean, this is not new. This is, you could say almost that a lot of the biblical things that people believe are a bit paranormal. I mean, that's sort of in that same vein, right?
Not even a bit. My God,
Right.
the Bible's got giants. It's got skinwalkers. It's got UFOs. It's got reincarnation. It's even got people being risen from the dead and miracles. And the Bible is wrought with all kinds of strange supernatural phenomena.
It is, and this is not. It's something that people have always been really, really interested in. People have, it's changed people's beliefs as far as religion. It's changed people, people's whole outlook on life sometimes. So it's like an endless well of conversation, for your new show, the Paranormal 60 with Dave Schrader, that you can get anywhere on podcast. So this is new though. Like, is your first episode out?
Yeah, actually, for the first 2 episodes are out on my YouTube channel at the Paranormal 60. We're right now talking to a bunch of different podcast companies about where we're going to take the show. So we haven't officially launched as an audio podcast form, but if people just look for the Paranormal 60 within the next few weeks, we should be up and running somewhere on all of the major platforms.
Gotcha.
So,
at least that's the hope.
You had mentioned that, like, you started noticing stuff as young as 2 and having these experiences. What was going on in your life, or what happened, or is there something that made you go, hey, you know what? I could make a career out of this.
I've been a dreamer since I was a little kid, right? And I used to sit in the garage with my old black and white tape recorder and my Kmart cassettes, and I would do pretend radio shows with my buddy. And I loved radio. And I grew up in Chicago, and I used to call and harass the radio jocks, and they would take my calls and talk to me and fill me in about it. And Roy Leonard, which was one of the big personalities in Chicago, even invited me into studio, and he would let me come in and watch what he did. And so that was kind of a seed I planted early in my life. And when I went to college, one of my favorite weird experiences, I graduated in 1985 from high school. So I have an affinity to a certain song you guys might be familiar with.
Yeah, you're my brother's age.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I went to college. I hung out in the house we had across from campus all the time, and my roommates were like, Schrader, get out and meet people. You can't just sit in a house and drink and go to school and come back and drink. And I'm like, I think I can, but
I'd argue on that point.
So, hand to God, this is what happened. I walk out the front door, and I'm going to go explore campus, and this really cute 1980s blonde girl with the ponytail and the short gym shorts and the tank top goes walking past. So I start following her, because this is long before stalking, right? I'm just following where she's off to. She goes to the Performing Arts Center. And when I get to the Performing Arts Center, she goes in. So I follow her in. I'm like, listen, I've done plays. I've been in musicals. Why not? I'll see what she's up to. Maybe I'll sign up. And I kept following her through the building, past the play tryouts and past musical tryouts and up the stairs. And at one point I stopped to look at a billboard, because she stopped and turned around to see if I was stalking her. And then I turned as she went into the last door on the left. So I walked down there, and there's a big sign, KQAL, Winona's Radio Alternative. And it said, now seeking on-air talent. And I'm like, God, this is awesome. I'll try to get into radio. And opened up the door, and there were a bunch of guys in there, and I walked in, and they introduced themselves and talked. And the whole time my head's on the swivel looking for the cute blonde.
Right.
And when we get done, they're like, all right, your training starts tomorrow, this, that, and the other. I'm like, hey, I got a quick question. Who is the blonde with the ponytail that came in here before me? And they all just kind of turned and looked at each other, and they're like, dude, if there was a cute blonde with a ponytail, do you think we'd be talking to you right now? And I'm like, no, I'm telling you, I followed a blonde across campus into this building. That's how I found you. And they're like, dude, there's no other exit from this room. And then they started telling me the ghosts of the Performing Arts Center and all these weird things that would take place. So that was a cool little weird transcendental paranormal experience that drove me to the radio. And I did that for a few years. And then I was out of it until 2006, when my partner, Tim, was working at a radio station. He said, hey, I've got an hour to kill on Sunday nights. Let's do a radio show together. What do you want to talk about? I said, how about the paranormal? Because I always loved it. My mom and dad were very supportive about my looking into it and reading books. And mom was always reading books about it. So he said, yeah, let's do it. And we launched on January 1st, 2016. And the show, 16 years in, or 2006. And here we are 16 years later, and it's still going. And, just it worked out. Things synchronistically aligned to make sure that I am where I am today.
That's awesome. So that's not you chasing ghosts or ghost chasing you, but that's ghost leading you.
Right. Yeah. And I've had a few of those strange experiences where I feel like the other side definitely directed me.
Sought you out. Interesting thing you said though, that your mom was always reading up on it. Was that something that she was into before the things that started happening with you, or is that, or how did she get into it?
Well, my mom and aunt are voracious readers, right? I mean, they have huge libraries of books, and most of their books are Dean Koontz and Stephen King. But anytime they could get a book on a real haunting, stuff by Dr. Hans Holzer or D. Scott Rogo or William Roll, Ed and Lorraine Warren, they were always reading them. As a matter of fact, I remember seeing the Amityville Horror book on our kitchen counter, and I went to look at it, and she's like, no, that's too intense for you. When you're older, you can read it. And then 14 years later, I introduced her to Chris Lutz, who's become a very good friend of mine, and he's the youngest son from the Amityville Horror. So here we've got this weird connection that comes back to circle again right here. My mom's reading the book telling me it's too scary for me, and now I'm Darkness Dave, the paranormal guy who's on TV and radio and doing all these things, that I'm friends with all these people she's read about her whole life. So it was, she just had that same interest I think many of us have had, and it's always been there. It's cyclical, with the nature of war, spiritualism comes to the forefront, and people want to understand what comes next. They want to communicate with somebody they've lost. And I really think this new renaissance kicked off on 9/11, because it was after that when people went to church in droves again, looking for answers. And when the church didn't have the answers, they started seeking answers elsewhere. And
it's hard when things don't have an ending, right? I like true crime. My wife doesn't mind true crime as long as it's not an open-ended thing, like somebody vanished, and she needs that closure. I feel like that's a big part of life, right? As we talk about this 9/11 thing, and people just sort of like wondering where their loved ones are now, and what's going to happen after this. The afterlife, we've always been consumed with it, but I think there's generations of people where they'd be like, oh, you just go to heaven. And they'd be like, oh, okay, cool. Well, great. Then I'm just going to go on over here. Now people are like, well, okay, but what is heaven? And what is this? And people, we just like answers, like I don't, if you say it, and this is how small it is. And when you're thinking about something like dying, right? If I'm like, hey, we're going to go to dinner on Saturday, sometime, and you're like, okay, what time? And then I'm like, well, I'll let you know. And then Friday you're like, hey, what time are we doing dinner? And I still don't have an answer for you. I would pull my fucking hair out,
kind of like trying to get on this podcast.
100%. That is the best. Trying to get on this show is just like dying.
Yes, we definitely want you.
It's the same thing. We definitely want to let you know. And then you're like, hey, just touching base. How about tomorrow?
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. Because I'm telling you guys, it was one more day, and then I was going to go do Fountains of Wayne's podcast.
Oh, my goodness. All right. So that's a good spot to take a break. We are talking with Dave Schrader. His new YouTube is up now, the Paranormal 60. You'll be able to hear his podcast coming up soon. Or you can go, I'm sure they can go listen to old episodes of the radio show, right? I mean,
there are some Darkness radios up there as well.
Yeah, Darkness radios as well. So, but we're going to be right back. But until then, listen to this. Welcome back to the Rockstar Dad Show. Don't forget, we're on Adobe Radio every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Again, on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. And then wherever you listen to podcasts, we're talking to Dave Schrader from the Paranormal 60. Gosh, we still haven't gotten into kids, and you did ask us a question. I think we may have to do another episode in a few. Hey, Dave, sometime we'd like to have you back for a second.
Sometime. Perfect. How about this? we'll talk about Parenthood and the paranormal here, and then
Okay.
you two join me on my podcast to talk about weird experiences you've had.
That's
There you
good.
go.
Okay, that is a
See?
good. I just wanted to tell you, I think our best one. I was going to tell him the Boise story. Is that the one you were thinking about, or did you have a different one?
I had a couple of different ones, but yeah.
Ooh.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you the Boise story
Okay.
for this podcast, because I think Bowling for Soup fans probably have not heard this, and it'd be interesting to hear how you react to it. But we were on tour, still in the van days, and we played. We were playing, a bunch of shows over in the Northwest, and we played up in the Seattle area, and we had blown a tire on our trailer or our van or something. It was our van because it's the time the girl left the naked picture in there and signed it. The girl who actually changed our tire left us a naked picture, and we didn't find it for like weeks later. Anyway, so this was a day off. We have this tire fixed. We go see a movie. And so we leave late in the evening. It's, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. We fill up on gas and we start driving to Boise, Idaho from Seattle. So that drive is however long it is. But it's, through, a lot of dark streets and all of this stuff. So we drove around 8 hours without stopping. We had a guitar tech that just drove, and he did 8 hours. It was time to fill up for gas. When we stopped, the clock, it was like into the morning hours by this point, and we had only gone 120 miles. Now, we were on a highway, and we were going the speed limit. We were going 70 miles an hour, but for something happened to us, and nobody has any recollection of like anything. We did not stop. So we went on a street for this amount of time, and then some sort of time warp thing fucking happened, and we end up somewhere, and we had only gone 120 miles in 8 hours.
Now, how high were you guys at that time, thinking you were driving 70 miles an hour?
So I thought you were talking elevation. No.
Yeah, that's of course what I meant, because that can affect the brain chemistry.
Well, so he was smoking the reefer. And this is a real story. I'm telling you, everybody will attest to it. Our guitar tech, not everybody was asleep. People were sleeping, but never at the same time. And that fucking shit happened. And we talk about it all the time.
Have any of you thought about going in for a regression to see what happened and have somebody hypnotize you and bring you back to that moment?
Never thought of that.
Never thought about it, but I mean, it's obvious something happened.
Yeah, because it was supposed to be like a 8 or 9 hour drive. So whenever we were stopping for gas, we should have had another hour to go. And it ended up being a 14-hour drive. We were late to load in. I mean, it was just time disappeared.
Time disappeared. Yeah. And you can't say that it's even a time zone thing, because we would have gained that amount of time.
Right.
So there's just a missing block of time for us within this drive where all of us experienced it at the same time, and nobody has any recollection of anything being odd or different or anything. So,
well, I will connect you with a hypnotherapist that I trust for regression, and you guys got to go back and find out what happened, but you got to let me know. I can't leave it open-ended like your wife. I need to know the answer to this.
Got to know the answer, man. You got to have it anyway. We got a few more of them, but just so you know, like, I mean, it's so, weird shit happens, and you guys, do you get into deja vu at all and things like that? I mean, surely you do.
Yeah. We cover deja vu, and all those strange phenomena where it's just like you're in a place where you seem to know more than you should about it, or know more about the history and things. Is that reincarnation? Are you just tapped into the cosmic ethernet and pulling out information that exists, and you're just in an elevated brain zone at that point? I don't know. There's so many different possibilities, right?
What about Vujade?
I call it Dave Vu whenever it happens to me, because I'm arrogant that way. Vujade, where you walk in and you have never been there before, never
happened before.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's again when the reefer is usually involved.
100%. Is that a George Carlin joke?
I think it might be a George Carlin. Yeah,
I
don't remember it. Somebody.
Yeah, I think I've got Fuja. It's somebody like that. It might
Yeah.
be George. Dave, so you say that, we are a dad show here, but we sometimes talk about other things. Actually, to be honest, we seldom talk about being dads anymore. I'm kidding. But you said that there's even a tie-in with the paranormal and you becoming a dad. So obviously we need to know what you mean by that.
Well, I've got 11 children between my wife and I. 8 of mine, 3 of hers. So we've come together. We've got 11 kids. And, doing what I've done and being on TV and doing a lot of these different programs, my kids are aware of the paranormal. Some of them have had their own experiences. Some could care less. Some are more interested. So it's just been a weird, progression. But I'll relate one story back to what you were saying earlier, Jaret, about when people meet you, they want to talk about all of where have you been? What are you doing?
Yeah.
My son asked me when he was in grade school, Dad, will you come to Parents' Day and talk about being a ghost hunter and a radio show host? I'm like, sure. So he put me on, and all the kids are supposed to sign up, and there's the podiatrist and the insurance guy and the dentist. And then I felt so bad because when I got there, they had to open the wall between classrooms to accommodate all the kids. And then I had principals and teachers and everybody, and they came up to me and they're like, listen, we're so excited. Everybody wants to hear this, but you got to remember, these are little kids. So you've got to really temper these ghost stories. So I did, and I made it a lot more fun. I told some of the sillier stories and things that had happened. And at the end, got great round of applause. And then the principal and the teacher take me aside and they're like, that was awesome. That was truly one of the best parent days we've ever had, but we can never have you back because nobody signed up for any of these other parents.
That is hilarious.
And they go, that whole back row of standing adults were all the other parents in listening to your talk because nobody was in their room. Right.
So how long ago was that?
Oh gosh. Well, my son is now 22. And he was like 9 at the time. Okay. So quite a while ago.
That's the difference in today's schools. Because what's your youngest now?
My youngest is 12 years old.
Okay, so you might have a little taste of this, but now, see, that's the thing. If a kid gets you to come to school to do anything now, and you have and you're you and whatever, they figure out a way for you to lecture the entire school. They'll figure that out. Like, okay, well, you know what? I could bring 3 classes. We could put you in the auditorium. You know what? What do you think about doing this in the gym?
Maybe when you're with Bowling for Soup, but not when you're Darkness Dave. People give you strange looks. I've got my license plate says Darkness, and
Darkness Dave.
My kids go to preschool at the church, right? And I'd pull up and drop them off, and you just see the look of disdain on all the other parents looking at me and looking at the Darkness plates. They have no clue what I really do. I'm very light and I like to have fun doing what we do, but darkness draws people in. Right?
What religion is the school?
Lutheran. Yeah.
Okay, so that's like a cross between Christianity and Catholic, right? Like it's like
it's like Catholic light.
It's Catholic light. That's what it is, right? They're Catholic, but they let you do some shit.
Yeah, we're not praying to idols as much, and our masses are usually an hour long as opposed to multi-hours. But
you like to chant and stuff, like you do some chanting.
No, we do hymns. I guess that's a form of chanting, right?
I went to a
religious rap.
No, you do like the thing where he goes and the something, and you go, and so say it with the thing and the thuff and the thing. You know what I mean? I'm not making fun.
No, I totally get it. Yeah, like the Apostles' Creed and when they're doing the callback. So
I've only been to Lutheran church one time, and it was with my wife's grandmother. And again, I grew up Church of Christ. So anything other than just a guy yelling at you and trying to terrify you, and then people singing with no music or anything like that, anything else, and literally anything else incorporated, is just mind-blowing to me. Because the first time I went to a church that had a piano, I was like, what the fuck? And then 5 years later, I go, it's a full rock show. They've got lights and, and all that. And then I go to the Lutheran and I'm just like, how do they know what to say all the time? And, and it's just, I'm so intrigued by all of it, man. You know what? You're going to have to come back again next week. And here's why, because I think this needs to be a multi-parter.
All right.
Because you just said you have 8 kids. we could talk about that for 48 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I got to hit on this many kids, and it's not necessarily about having that many kids. It's just you have more experience. My son's 11, and he's not into any kind of scary movie or thriller or anything like that. There's kids in his class that started watching, Annabelle and It and stuff like that in first or second grade. And I'm not saying what's right or what's wrong. I mean, I think different kids have different levels of whatever they're ready for at different ages.
Right.
But I guess what I'm getting at is you being involved in this, paranormal world. When your kids were at a younger age, were they just open to it, aware of it? Were any of them spooked out by it?
They've, because I've never played it up. It's not like I wear it on my, I wear it on my shirt. I've got the property of Area 51, but I mean, it's not like something I'm browbeating kids about. We just have normal life. But if they have questions, I never shy away from it. And, of course, when you're on the radio and doing TV, it's a little bit more salacious because that sells, right? We're getting into the weirder stuff. But, my kids probably started watching horror movies around the age of 10. And I just depended on the horror movie and, not like gore porn, but just, Halloween, Night of the Living Dead, some of the classics to break them in slowly. But the ones that don't have an interest, I don't care, whatever they want to do. But with that said, I've been to conferences where, the name of my talk is Frightmare Creatures, things that really do go bump in the night. And we have all these people come in and there's a lady sitting in the front row with like a 6-year-old. And I go, hey, these are some scary stories and these people paid to be here. I can't tamp it down for one little kid. And this might not be the best talk for him to be a part of. Oh, don't worry. He's been watching Chucky since he was 2.
Yeah.
So I took it at that moment as my God-given right to try to terrify the shit out of that little kid before and in the next 10 minutes, this kid went from sitting up to curled up to mom to balling his head down. And about 15 minutes in, she got up and they walked out the door and shut the door. And that was just in a couple of the creepy stories I told. And I did, and the audience erupted in applause. And I'm like, yeah, don't tell me that this kid is prepared for scary. I will show you scary. And we had just a great time. But, everybody's, like you said, everybody's got different parenting styles and the way that they do it. And again, if you, to me, maybe educating them to that kind of gore is why they're not affected when they see horror in real life. When things happen, they're just like, because it's just, it plays out on TV, plays out on their phones. It's not real. There's no contextual feel to it, which I think is the problem with the world, period, is just everybody's so blasé. Unless it's in your neighborhood, maybe even just on your block, it doesn't matter. And,
Wait,
the real horrors.
Where do you live?
Minnesota.
Because we live in North Dallas, and that is very accurate here. In fact, I don't know if you know this or not, but COVID didn't even happen here. We didn't even have it.
No.
We just pretended that everything was fine.
Well, that's right.
Everything's great. Like the fucking restaurant's closed for like 3 weeks, and it's crazy here.
Well, that's because it's so hot in Dallas, right? Aren't you guys just cooking the virus right out? It burns out before it even affects anyone.
100%. 100%.
Let's do the disclaimer. The views and opinions of everyone on the show is full of shit. Please do not pay attention. Do not cancel us. We are not Joe Rogan.
I think we should use that disclaimer on every episode.
If you get any information that you think is useful off of this program, there's fucking something wrong with you. You said, Gary, I think that's a really good question, Gary. We need to approach that as a topic of just being parents of that, because you're so right. I think a lot of times it comes from kids that have siblings, though, like older siblings, because Everett has a little buddy who came over, and it was the same exact thing. He's like, oh, let's watch, Chucky or It or this or this or this. And that kid's got, 5 older siblings, whereas Everett, he has an older brother and sister, but they're only here, a little bit of the time because it's from my previous life. And my daughter's 19, so she's like a fucking unicorn. But that kid is scared of everything, and it's like, man, you're scared of the fat purple lady on Ariel, there's This is crazy.
Ursula, Jaret. She has a name. It's
Sorry, Ursula.
I wouldn't really coming from like a place of judgment on that either. I mean,
no.
There are times where there's judgment. You know, it's like there's times where, you know, in first grade and it's the oldest kid and you're like, what are you doing taking this kid to this movie? That may not be right, but you're 100% right. There's other times where, dude, that's the fifth kid. Like on the second kid, we're
not even taking pictures. Yeah, we're not even taking pictures of the fifth kid. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
Fifth kid gets a cell phone at like 4.
Yes.
You know,
yes, you've tapped into my life perfectly.
Yeah, you keep everybody, you know, the first child is like, yeah, I mean, that kid didn't see a fucking screen until she was 18 years old. You know, it's never had a soda or whatever. And now your 3-year-old comes in, you're just like, hey, put my phone down and go grab yourself a soda. You know, like go hit that Skittles bong real quick and then get outside, play with your friends.
My dad, I remember being about 10 years old, Halloween, and it was one of those rare instances where like Halloween was a Friday night and I'd had a great trick-or-treat session, I crashed hard, and about 11:45, my dad comes in and wakes me up and he goes, come on, we're going to go watch a movie. And I'm like, what? And he goes, I want you to watch this movie with me. It's called Night of the Living Dead and they're showing it at midnight.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right. And we sit down, and as it starts, he turns to me and he goes, this is the only movie that's ever scared me. So automatically my stomach grinches, my asshole tightens, and I'm like, oh God, what am I in for? Right. And that movie with commercials on commercial TV freaked me out so bad that I wasn't in any rush to go see it. But now I could show my 10-year-old stepson and he'd just kind of shrug it off. Night of the Living Dead would have no impact to him because of Five Nights at Freddy's games and all of these other, Shadow Man games and Slender Man games and things that they've already adapted to by this age, that it's just like, it's funny to see how they've changed. But with that said, my kids have always been pretty stoic in the face of the supernatural. I was separated from my wife, but living in the basement. She was upstairs and I'd just come back from an event, and all of a sudden, boom, 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 down the stairs comes my ex-wife, and she's got our son Linus with her, and she goes, tell Dad what happened. And I'm like, what's going on? He goes, yeah, Dad. He goes, I could see Pacey. She was running around in our room. And I'm like, honey, Pacey's, she barely can stand, let alone run. He goes, I know, but she was in my room running around. And Carrie goes, she's sound asleep in her crib, honey. She can't even get out of her crib. And he's like, no, Mom, I'm telling you, I saw this. And at this time, my son's maybe like 4 and 3 or 4. And, insistent that he saw her running around in his room. And she goes, now tell him the other part. And he goes, well, then, Dad, there's that boy on the top bunk. I go, well, honey, that's your brother, Nathan. He goes, no, Nathan's sleeping. This boy's sitting on the top stair. Now, you have to picture, my son looks like Opie from the Andy Griffith Show. He's got the red hair, freckles, just this cute, innocent little face. And he goes, he's sitting on the top stair, Dad, and he's looking at me like this. And he tips his head and looks at me underneath his brow. And just even thinking about it, all the hair stands up on my arm. Jesus. And I'm like, okay. And I told Carrie, my ex-wife, I got this. You can go upstairs. She goes upstairs, and being a dad, my other son is in that room with whatever's up there. And I'm like, how am I going to handle this? All right, buddy, you can sleep down here with Dad. I laid there for about 10 minutes and my gut's turning. I'm like, dude, if there is something creepy in that room, you've got to go.
Yeah.
So then I did the boisterous old man deal where I just, like, every room I'm flipping lights on through the entire house. And I will tell you, there goddamn better not be something in that room, because I will grab it out and I will get. And I'm just trying to bolster myself the whole time. And I'm just like, fuck, if there's a ghost, hear me scream and just hide, right?
Yeah, right.
And I get in and I flip on the light and I'm like, where are you? You leave my kids alone. And blah, 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 blah. Talking about it. And, a couple weeks later, my son Nathan comes down and he's like, Dad, I want my friends to have a sleepover. And I'm like, what friends? And he goes, all my friends. And I go, okay, what friends? And he goes, all my friends in my room. And I'm like, oh, all of his imaginary friends. You have to call their parents and tell them they're going to spend the night. And I'm like, first of all, how do you even know that's a thing? He's much too young to call. So I start pretending to call all these parents and telling them they're going to spend the night. And he goes back up in his room, and I hear him talking and talking and talking. And all of a sudden he starts like, no, we can't do that. I'll get in trouble. My dad will get mad. And the friends were telling him we should open up the window and climb out. And it was a 2nd-story window. And I'm not hearing that side of the conversation, but I can hear my son having this debate. And finally he comes storming out of his room and he goes, you got to call back their parents and tell them to pick up their kids because they're jerks and they want me to jump out of the 2nd-story window.
Jeez.
And I'm like, where the hell did this come from? This is really weird. So then I started taking things a lot more seriously. And I walked up into the room and I go, I don't know what is here, but you do not belong here and you do not have authority to be here. And you will not mess with my son, or I swear to God, I will call down every holy source I know to deal with this shit. So you get out of this room now. And then I did a quick prayer around the room. I gave a call to John Zaffis, who's the nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren, and I'm buddies with. And I'm like, Johnny, this is what's going on. He goes, all right. He goes, you got that holy water I gave you? I said, yes, I do. He goes, you go in, you do a blessing in all 4 corners of the room. You leave that bedroom door open and you pray it out of that room. He goes, I want you to lift up the mattress and box springs and make a cross with the holy water underneath it so that nothing comes up from underneath the bed. And I'm like, holy shit, John, things come up underneath the bed. And he goes, you don't want any access point for these things to get to your kids. So I hung up Michael medallions in the room, did the blessing on the room, and they didn't have any more problems after that. So, but the kids were always matter of fact about it. They're just like, oh yeah, I see this, I hear that.
Sure.
Very weird, but it's those moments, and it's more chilling when a kid tells you because of every horror movie we've ever seen, right?
Yeah.
And when the kid is like, oh, Dad, there's this thing in my room. And you're like, oh, God, what am I going to do? Bad guy comes in, I can grab him by the throat and throw him out. I can't just grab a ghost and chuck it out the window.
No.
2 things.
Mm-hmm.
My son is not going to be allowed to listen to this episode.
Okay.
That was freaking terrifying.
Okay.
But that you kind of answered one of my questions, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyways. Was one of my questions was going to be like ghosts or spirits or whatever. Do you think that they're actually there trying to tell us something, trying to communicate, trying to interact, whatever that may be? Or are we just kind of stumbling around and they're there and we're just interrupting their daily life? But it sounds like they're actually aware of us.
I think there's multiple layers to what hauntings are. The true definition of a ghost is almost impossible at this point. We want to think a ghost is the discarnate soul of grandma, right? And she's in the kitchen. But then why are people in her childhood home seeing ghosts of her as a child?
Right.
When she died at the age of 90 across the country, and they're seeing old grandma shuffling around the house. I think we leave fractures, pieces of ourselves in places that are special to us or places that were traumatic to us. And there's a little fragment left off from us. Those traumatic moments may be what we call residual hauntings, things that play out over time. And they seem to not notice you. It's just always grandma, wrapping presents at Christmas or making the Thanksgiving dinner and, just simple things like that. And you could walk in and look at her and wave your hand and she wouldn't notice you. But then there are these strange time slip phenomena. And this is one of my favorite stories. This guy goes, I got to tell you, my grandparents built this house in an old cornfield. This wasn't ancient Indian burial grounds. There was no war that played out here. Nobody ever died in the house. And one day grandma's sitting in the living room watching Jeopardy, and in walk these 3 shadowy figures, and they stop in front of her chair. They look at her and then run out of the room. Now grandma's house is haunted.
Sure.
And we believe grandma. She's good. She's a good person, right? She dies a few years later. He goes, and I got to tell you, he goes, I come home and I've got 2 of my buddies with me, and we're going to go in and watch some TV. And we walk into the living room, and sitting in my grandmother's chair is my grandmother. And we looked at her and looked at each other, and we ran out of the room. And he goes, and then it hit me. Holy shit, this is exactly what she saw. Who was haunting who in that moment? Was it time slip phenomena? We like to think that time is linear, right? It starts and it ends, and that's your life. Sure. But I think we're rubbing up against different aspects of time all the time. And this house that you're all sitting in, this piece of land has always existed from when the Big Bang happened to the end of time. And each level is a page in that book. And sometimes the page gets wet and you start to see the words on the next page, and then it'll fade. And I think that there's more to a haunting, that it's like that. Sometimes we just bump into time. And we may be haunting ourselves. We may be hearing things from the future, not the past. So the stomping around in the house and you hear voices calling out, maybe that's because they're hearing you walk around in the house today.
Right.
And you're haunting them. Kind of like the movie The Others with Nicole Kidman.
That's some insightful and trippy shit.
Yeah, well, if you put deja vu into that same thing, right?
Yeah, right.
That's futuristic shit, right? Like it's just like, wait a minute, I fucking, it's like,
Well, they tell us deja vu is basically our brains.
Yeah.
It's a hiccup in our system, like the CD players, portable. Remember when we got them, you couldn't move very much because they would skip,
Yeah.
and then they built that skip charge into it where it would actually memorize the next 10 seconds of the song. So if you bumped it, it would just keep playing and then pick itself back up and start building up again. Well, they think the brain works the same way because they've actually been able to find galvanic skin reactions to timing that your body reacts to a shot seconds before it actually happens. Like if the doctor's going to give you a shot, your body will not just out of anticipation and fear, but it will actually react as if it was getting the shot. And that's because what we're experiencing is actually a few milliseconds before what actually happens. So sometimes deja vu might just be that hiccup in the system where your brain has caught up and all of a sudden,
interesting.
Right. So you're having that double moment of, I've been here before. I've seen this entire thing, and then it's gone.
So it's not just a glitch in the matrix.
Right. Well, it is. It's a buffering of the brain, right? It's the brain caught up too fast and came back. So that's one concept of it. Or are you living a multi-universe life? At that moment, did yourself in another universe just happen to walk into that room, or did it happen 10 years ago for that version of you? And those memories are kind of collapsing in on each other because it's one of the few times throughout all the different multiverses you all did the same thing.
It's interesting, and that the whole multiverse thing, and it has gotten to be so popular these days, obviously with the different Spider-Man movies and all of that. That's something that these, just as you say, layers of
well, Einstein and Hawking and Michio Kaku and all of these major scientists have talked about this for years, that it exists, that there is something else there. And sometimes we're just getting reflections of those coming back at us. So wormholes may be how we're getting voices. Wormholes may be how we can travel through time and space. There are different aspects of all of this that play together. And that's why I'm so fascinated. Jaret, your wife might not like the supernatural because there is no definitive answer.
Right.
Everyone opens up to another, but guys like us, we'd like just to keep learning. We want there to be another piece to the puzzle, another step to the mystery. And that's what's so intriguing about doing this kind of work.
Man, I have so many questions still, but I wish I didn't have this this hard cutoff, because I have a thing with Kevin Lyman from Warped Tour here in a little bit. And you can't say no to that guy. He owns punk rock.
Totally understand.
So Dave, please come back. But before we go, we used to drive around in the van.
Yes.
And Eric would take our previous bass player would take the night shift a lot. And he would put the radio on this Art Bell. I assume you're familiar with Art Bell and
Coast to Coast AM.
Probably were a fan, right?
I was a host on Coast to Coast AM for 5 years.
Yeah, I remember hearing that. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, I did Coast to Coast, and then I actually took over Art Bell's last show, Midnight in the Desert. So I'm the only other host in the world that got to do his first show and his last show.
You took over. Are you the one that took over his show when he was went off the grid or whatever?
No, that was George Norrie took over.
Okay.
But I became one of the fill-in hosts on weekends, and I did that for 5 years. And
shit.
Then after he passed away, his show Midnight in the Desert, the host that replaced him kind of just stopped showing up for work. So they reached out to me and they're like, we need a host. And I took over.
Didn't his son have something to do with it for a while or something?
I don't even want to contemplate. I think there was some sexual harassment in his school by a teacher, and then things got blown out of proportion, and then allegations were thrown at Art that it was him that had done it, and it wasn't. So I think he just kind of stepped away from everything for a while to recollect his thoughts.
Right. I mean, that guy, again, some of the stuff used to scare the shit out of me.
Yeah, Coast to Coast AM, and it's still going strong. But yeah, late night radio, talking and listening to those weird stories. Yeah,
and that's what it is, right? Just people, and he had a whole side story with, things that were after him and, whatever. So, God, I'm glad I stumbled into that. That's cool as shit. And that's cool that Gary knew that. I didn't know it because I didn't listen to that shit because, that's too late for me. And even if I was listening, I would have probably been hammered.
Yeah.
And secondly, that's terrifying. Dave Schrader, man, again, please come back. And I'm actually being serious. Let's
anytime.
Please come back on. Because I think we got to get more into fatherhood, because anytime Gary and I hear somebody has 8 kids, we're just like, Jesus Christ, let's go through the timeline and talk about all the changes in your life as all of these children popped up. Goodness gracious, man, that's a lot.
Oh, and I've got some and I'll be happy to come back, but to encapsulate, I just a few years ago found my oldest daughter I didn't even know I had, thanks to Ancestry.com. 2 years ago, found my biological father and my 7 siblings I didn't know I had. So I've got a lot of fun stories and weird parenting things.
We got to hear about that.
Well, holy shit.
Yeah.
I just found out who my biological father was 4 or 5 years ago. And I now have 3 siblings that I didn't know I had. And that is definitely something we have in common. But seriously,
did we just become best friends, Jaret?
You want to go do karate in the garage?
Yes.
Yes. Dave Schrader, the new show is called The Paranormal 60 with Dave Schrader. You can right now see that on his YouTube station, and will be coming up. The first 2 episodes are up there. There's some of your old show up there as well. Where can people find you on social media?
Just look up on Twitter. I'm the Dave Schrader, THE, the Dave Schrader. And then if you go to, actually the best place is go to paranormal60.com or theparanormal60.com with the 60. And right there on the front page, you can see links on the bottom to my Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everything.
Love it, man. You're awesome. And
thank you, guys.
I'd rather have you back on sooner than later, because this is fresh. Because let's get that scheduled.
You got it,
Dave. Thank you so very much, man. You're awesome, and good luck with the new show.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
All right,
thanks,
man.
Dave.